That's the sound of a hemp guitar made by Hemptone Music. This is the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. My name is Eric Herlock, and if you've been listening to the show lately, you know that I took this guitar with me out to Montana for the Montana Summer Hemp Summit, and people out there loved this guitar, and they had a whole lot of questions about it, about how it was made, etc. But first, a quick word from our sponsors, and then we'll come back with a couple of updates and then get right into my conversation with Jay Burstein from Hemptone Music. This episode of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is made possible through generous support from IND Hemp in Fort Benton, Montana. Check them out at indhemp.com and see what the goodness of hemp is all about. IND Hemp is also a big supporter of the Hemp Feed Coalition. This is the initiative to make hemp a legal feed for livestock. You can feed hemp grain to your kids, but you can't feed it to your cattle. What's going on with that? Anyway, so check out the Hemp Feed Coalition at hempfeedcoalition.org. Our show is also made possible this week through generous support from King's Agri-Seeds, who want you to be aware of their 2-day hemp field day. It's happening in Christiana, Pennsylvania. That's in Lancaster County. That's August 15th and 16th. So yeah, next week. So go to kingsagriseeds.com to learn more. I'll have a link for that on the show page for this episode, but if you're going to go to it, drop me a line because I'm going to be there too. So yeah, thanks again to IND Hemp and King's Agri-Seeds for your generous support. Okay, so we're going to be talking about hemp guitars today with Jay Burstein at Hemptone Music. But before we get into that, I just wanted to, update you on a couple of things. So I am recording this show a little earlier in the week than I normally do because I'm headed up to Penn State's Ag Progress Days this week. So what is that? What does that mean, Penn State's Ag Progress Days? Okay, well, good question. So Penn State's Ag Progress Days is Pennsylvania's largest outdoor agricultural exposition. They've got over 400 exhibitors from the U.S. and Canada. It's hosted by Penn State's College of Agricultural Sciences, and it showcases educational programs, current research, and the latest innovations in agriculture equipment and technology. And there's people everywhere, and they're all pretty much farmers. So I love this because I love to talk to people. I love to hear their stories. So I haven't actually been up to Ag Progress Days since the before times, before the COVID shutdown. So I'm excited about this. One year, I guess maybe this was 2016 or 2017, I was up there and I was working with my colleague Phil Gruber. We were going to interview the new president of Del Val College. And so I was sitting on a bench just waiting for Phil to show up for this scheduled interview we had. And I was early, and I was talking to this old-timer farmer who just was also sitting on the bench. And, he told me all kinds of cool stories of the old days, one-room schoolhouse, the old milking parlor, just a really neat glimpse into agricultural life, 50 years ago. Or longer, I forget how old he was. But the whole time I was talking to him, I wished I had, a microphone so I could record his stories. And this was back before I even had a podcast, but I've always been, interested in audio stories and capturing, the oral tradition sort of thing. So this year, I am going up with my new microphone, and I am going to record conversations and talk to people and hear the stories of the old days. So I'm excited about that. So I'm pretty sure that next week's show is going to be some of my coverage of Ag Progress Days. There is hemp research at Penn State up there, so we'll get some of that in too. And I'm going to be visiting Herb Grove. You remember Herb? We talked to him, I think, back in February. He's the guy from Brush Mountain Bison, where he grows hemp and raises bison. So I'm headed out there Tuesday evening. So I'm excited about that. So yeah, I'm looking forward to getting back and reporting all of these things that I've found at Ag Progress Days to you here on next week's show. Okay, so just one more quick Ag Progress story before we get into my conversation with Jay Burstein. So back in 2016, I was covering Ag Progress Days, and Miss America was there. Her name was Betty Cantrell. She grew up on a farm in Georgia and was there at Ag Progress Days to show her support for American agriculture. And I had the chance to interview her earlier in the day. But a little while later, I was walking down Main Street. You know, the whole place is kind of set up like a town. And who do I see headed up the hill in a golf cart? Yeah, Miss America. And as she motored past me, I sort of held up my hand and I leaned out and I said, "High five, Miss America." And she leaned out and gave me a high five. All right, that's it. Let's talk to Jay. Jay Burstein from Hemptone Music. Welcome back to the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast. How you doing?
I'm great. Glad to be here. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah, well, thank you, because you loaned me this beautiful instrument, this little half-size guitar made from industrial hemp that I was able to take with me on my travels to Montana. I guess that was last week. And it was really special for me because, from what I understand, you sourced some of the hemp for that instrument from I&D Hemp in Montana. So for me, it was like taking their hemp back to the mothership in the shape of a guitar. So it was like circular and wonderful. So thank you for that.
You're very welcome. Who says you can't go home, right?
Right. Montana is starting to feel like home a little bit for me, my home away from home. So yeah, I brought the guitar with me. I traveled, on the airplane with it. I stowed it in the overhead. It was really just easy to travel with. And, I knew because it was solidly constructed that, I didn't have to worry too much about it because it's sort of made as a travel guitar to sort of take some of those bumps from the road.
Yeah, it's rugged. It's not dainty at all. You don't have to worry about bumping it or knocking it into something, or if a piece of luggage or whatnot lands on top of it, you're not going to kill it.
Yeah.
So I sort of look at mine like jeans, like the more little injuries I get, the cooler it is,
Right. The wear and tear adds character.
Yeah. That's, that's just my angle on it. But yeah, it's a rugged instrument, and basically the instrument I designed is the one I'd always wanted. As someone who'd done some traveling, especially as a younger person, with guitars and whatnot, the right thing wasn't out there. A precise instrument that played in tune, that was rugged, that didn't care about whether it was humid or dry or hot or cold, didn't really exist. There was little stuff out there. I never liked the sound. I never liked that they never intonated well. Fractional size guitars, I find you have to sort of retune for every key you're playing in a little bit. And as I went on my sort of luthier guitar building repair journey, I realized that, there's a better way to do this if only it was built in this manner. And what that manner is, you mentioned half-size guitar, and I don't really think of it that way. It's approximately the half of a size of a guitar, but it's a full 25-inch scale length. We're going to get nerdy here for guitar people, which is about the string length of your full-size guitar that we're all used to seeing. But I lop it off essentially at the 5th fret, which means the guitar is tuned to A. So there's a little transposing adjustment that might go on for guitars. If you capoed your guitar at the 5th fret, your E chord becomes your A chord, and your G chord becomes a C chord, for example. But once you get the hang of that, you have a precise instrument that plays all the right notes at all the right things. And the intonation, meaning the note at the octave is the same as the open note, is true. And so that's the best way. And your string tensions are accurate as well
Okay.
this way. And that's the best way to have a small size instrument that plays in tune and precisely and projects properly. But if you are a ukulele player, the beauty of it is having it lopped off where it is, those first four strings, the highest four strings, are the exact same as the ukulele. You already know how to play this. So if you were looking to maybe a uke player trying to get maybe, graduate's the right word, but also play guitar perhaps, this is a great step in that direction, and vice versa. So it was just didn't exist. I wanted it, and I was building composite guitars and was playing around with natural fibers. And about the time that hemp was becoming legal, just sort of had to do it.
Right. And we did sort of an extensive interview a few years ago when you were, more in the earlier stages of your luthier journey. So I will reference, people can go back and hear more of your origin story, because you told us everything back then. It was such a great story, your travels in South America and all kinds of stuff, and your experience as a drummer. So really neat stuff. Like, you've got a great story, and just I am blown away by the quality of this instrument. And it was my companion for the week. Like I'm a musician that, it's part of my daily kind of, I don't even know what you call that, but I like to play music every day. It's just part of who I am. So when I was thinking about traveling to Montana for a week, I was like, oh, I really want to bring like my ukulele with me or something. But then the light bulb went off. I'm like, I wonder if Jay would lend this to me. And not even knowing that you made it out of IND hemp. So that was like an extra bonus. And thank you, just so gracious and generous, and I appreciate it. So I played it a lot. I spent a lot of time with this instrument. And it was the Montana Summer Hemp Summit. It took place at a college, I think Providence University in Great Falls. And Lancaster Farming had a table set up in the common area, and the guitar was there. And I stood there most of the time and talked to people about it, and there was just great interest in this thing. And people would play it if they were, inclined to do so. And everyone just sort of loved it, and was very curious about your process. What else is in it? How do you make the composite? So I wonder if you can just give us like just a brief, overview of your process and how you make it.
Gladly. Let me hit on, you mentioned that it gets a lot of attention and people were sort of drawn to it. And that sort of brings attention to hemp, or a hemp composite, or industrial hemp. People are drawn to it, and they come up to me with them and other people I know. And like, whoa, what is that? And then you are suddenly spreading the gospel of industrial hemp. And you sort of, I try and have people have a few facts in their heads, so rattle off about CO2 and the soils, and all the potential things that can be made from hemp instead of plastics and wood and
right.
cotton.
Like when you play this, you become an ambassador for the bio-based economy.
Right. You become an ambassador. I've used that exact phrasing before. Or it's also, I've also like to think of it as like a beacon for hemp awareness,
Yeah.
I back in the 90s when I was playing in bands, we had mandolin, and people would come up to that guy all the time. What is that thing, man? Is that a ukulele? Is that a little guitar? What is it? And because you see a lot more mandolins now than you did then, but I just watched that guy throughout the country explain and teach everyone what a mandolin is and its roots and how it's come through and how it's essentially tuned like a violin, but it has this, that, and the other. And so that conversation that I was seeing happen with mandolin, I now see happening about hemp and these guitars, which is great, I think. As far as the process goes, that's been a journey. I started, and when we first spoke, I was making homemade molds with clay and fiberglass, and developing the process of, do I attach the neck at what point, and do I make the neck and the body separately, or do I make each side separate, the back separate, the top separate? Going through that long phase of experimentation, embracing. So in winter I'm going to say right on New Year's of 2020, I had designed a better way, a better instrument, and a better way to make the instrument. So not only do you have to design the instrument here, I have to come up with the tooling involved to make it. And that's a little above my knowledge level. So I was working with the Vermont Technical College, which is near me here, and their engineering students were developing methods, and then COVID hit. And I was sort of stuck with no way to make it for the longest time. And getting an engineer and a facility to mill the aluminum that I needed for the body mold, because it's a unibody, and having that design took a long time when the government, I think, was just anyone who could manufacture anything was just giving them all the work and money they could handle. So I couldn't get my calls returned for the longest time. But finally got past that. And so the key element that I have now is it's a unibody construction. The back, sides, and neck and peg head are all one piece of hemp. And that happens in a mold under compression and heat. And I typically use entropy resins, which is a bio-based epoxy. And it's compression resin. So I just there's an A and a B part, or male and female, and I throw the hemp in there and lay it up a certain way for certain directional strengths and whatnot.
Like the actual fibers, like you're laying actual fibers into the mold.
It looks like I'm pulling grass out of a bag. It's just raw hemp fiber, and I, lay it in place and sort of orient it here and there, and mix up a bunch of epoxy resins and put them in there and just smush it under great pressure. And it displaces the liquid resins through the fibers, and has ideally some squeeze out, so that we're having an optimum fiber to resin ratio. So it's not too heavy or too thick in one place or another. And that's takes some getting used to on how to get it to be just the way I want it. And then I usually end up having to do a little shaping after that. Also. The tops are made a little differently, where I just basically make a flat sheet of hemp, different actually hemps and orientations. At this point, it's a different grade of fiber. And that's very unidirectional, like a piece of spruce wood would be. So the strength is front to back instead of side to side, more so.
Okay.
And that's just a flat sheet that I'll make.
And that's the front of the guitar, like what you see
right,
under the strings.
Resonant area, the front of it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then it's just shaped like and thickness and graduated like a piece of wood would be. And I'm tapping it and trying to find the sweet spots and the sweet thicknesses and all that. And there's some carbon fiber reinforcements. There's a D-shaped carbon fiber tube that runs the length of the neck, which provides the perfect amount of stiffness and relief in the neck under string tension. And
that sort of acts like a truss rod?
Right. The truss rod, it provides extra strength, and it's a truss rod, but it's not adjustable.
Okay.
But it doesn't need to be. It just sits right in the sweet spot, and is going to hold that particular relief throughout, no matter your environment.
Right. When you look at the guitar, like the back and the body and the neck are, at least the one I have is like a brownish kind of hempy color. And then the top, like you're talking about, is sort of like silvery. So can you talk about the differences in those fibers and where you sourced each of them?
Yeah, well, the body that you were just talking about, that has been sourced recently from IND Hemp, and they've been great to work with, and that's the cleanest raw fiber from the States I've come across. If anyone's out there thinks they can do it cleaner, hit me up. But just the amount of least amount of hurd in with the bath. I use primarily bass fibers, and then there's hurd in there, which I like the sprinkling of it because it does sort of lighten it and it adds a texture, and it's not enough to weaken anything, especially under pressure. But so the top is further refined hemp strains. I think it's about the place it would be before it becomes woven. So it almost feels like hair at that point. And that's a darker brownish gray color as I get it. But I can add pigments to the resin. Maybe people have seen people do like a lot of tabletops, and they do these resin pours, and they can put colors in there.
Sure.
So I can do something similar to that and infuse it. And I usually just lighten it up a hair with some white, simply because in the sun, when something's dark, it's hotter, and will intensify UV rays, and you'll get that heat, which isn't great for staying in tune, and or comfortable to play. So you are out on on the beach in the sun or something like that. A black t-shirt is hotter than a white t-shirt, and that's usually why I try and lighten it up a bit.
Okay, you've taken sort of the player into consideration a few ways too. So you have the lighter color, so it doesn't heat up as much, but then also on the neck itself, where you have like the fret indicators. Most guitar players know it's like 3, 5, 7, 10, and 12. There's a little dot on the side of the neck to show you where you are, and you made them glow in the dark, which I discovered sort of inadvertently, but that was a fun surprise.
Yeah, and you're doing, like, I love the campfire jam scenario, and I need those dots because of my ability. And when you have a light source in front of you, to then look down and try and see something in the shadows is hard for me. So that was another thing I did essentially for me, but people seem to really appreciate it. And it's neat. It does set it apart, and I can play with the colors with that stuff too.
Okay.
That's essentially like a powdered pigment,
right,
that I can mix in with some epoxy and drill a hole and fill it. There's a video of me doing that somewhere on my Instagram.
Okay. Getting back to the fibers that you use for the front-facing component, I think you mentioned in an earlier conversation that you source those from Europe because maybe we're not processing at that level here in the U.S. Is there?
Not that I've found, unfortunately. Yeah, I ended up buying that through a warehouse distributor here in the States, and I believe they're importing it from Eastern Europe, if not China.
Right, but an opportunity for processors out there, like we could have more guitars if we could get you some of this extra refined fiber, right?
Yeah, and I would love to make it all local, and at least in the States, if not Vermont. When I first started all this, everything was coming from Eastern Europe and China. And the fact that I can get what I get from IND, and there's some other processors around the country that I've worked with as well, and just watching the progress there with what hemp I'm getting from them, it's getting better and better.
Cool.
That, what you were just saying reminds me of something, Laura Sullivan, who was on your show.
Yeah.
We just recently discovered each other on the socials, and I went and listened to your interview with her, and I was impressed. And then I saw some of how she's processing her hemp there by hand.
Right, like scutching and all of these weird things. Yeah.
Yeah, and what she's coming up with is basically what I'm using on my tops. And so just yesterday I messaged her and I was like, would you like to make a collaboration? We can maybe document it. I'm going to go up and see her harvest and use her hemp, and maybe she can have, she probably has some aesthetic ideas. We're going to talk later today. We haven't really spoken. We've just messaged.
That is awesome. That makes me happy to hear that.
Collaborate on guitar. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. That's great. That makes me happy. How long does it take you to make one of these instruments? And do you have like a production line, assembly line sort of thing? Or what's the process of production?
I tend to chase my muses, so that every time I try and do that, I get distracted and focused on a particular thing. But as one thing is sort of curing, I try and prepare for the next one. It takes it takes over because of cure times, especially with the finish. It can take, you got to let it sit a couple weeks after you spray it,
Hmm.
especially in the summertime. But my part of the build, if I could be undistracted, and everything goes exactly how it's supposed to, it could be done in a week.
Okay.
But it just never works that way. There's always some sort of snafu that I either have to redo or go back and fix, or I go back and fix it 2 or 3 times and then realize I should have just redone it the first time. Um, but and then the body, that machine, I call it the guillotine, that makes the bodies, the big aluminum
I've seen a
compression.
video of that on your Instagram feed.
Right.
What is the Instagram feed, by the way? Is it at Hemptone Music?
It is. Yeah, at Hemptone Music, and the website is hemptonemusic.com. And try and build an audience. So anyone out there who wants to sign up for the newsletter or
Oh,
follow the
right.
socials, I would really
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Come on in. Sign up. I'm sorry, but yeah, you were talking about the guillotine and your process of putting it all together.
Yeah, so that been quite a learning curve using that. I mean, I designed that with an engineer, and had it made, but to get things laid up just so that they stay in place as it compresses, and the temperatures are just so for uh, to like make the resin thin, and less viscous as it warms up, and it absorbs and blends better at that point. But if you go too warm, it'll start to cure on you and solidify. So there's a bit more technique in that machine than I
Right.
anticipated.
That's cool.
So yeah, but once it's in there and curing, I have heating elements embedded in it, and I can just crank it up to about 185 degrees for an hour and let it cool, and it's cured.
Okay.
Processes I've used in the past, it takes, it can take a day to cure. It can have to sit in an oven for many hours at very specific temperatures at very specific times. So this device has really sped up the process and made it more accurate.
Cool. Is this like your full-time gig? Is this what you're doing with your your working life, or do you have
Yeah, I mean,
other
I
things?
hustle here and there, but and I have some long time repair customers that I still take care of. Um,
As a luthier, as a
yeah,
guitar tech. Yeah. Okay.
traditional guitars,
Yeah.
acoustic electrics. But this has been the dream for a long time now, and definitely made some sacrifices to keep the dream alive. Um,
Well, I appreciate
but
that
it's
you've done
it's
that
it
because it's a
takes
beautiful instrument and it's fun to play. And yeah, if you're a traveler, if you're a hemp enthusiast, if you're a musician, this is might be the guitar for you. Check it out.
I think even as a musician, another reason I liked it was like, say you're playing with some of your friends and there's a couple other acoustic guitars in the mix. When you're all sort of playing, it turns muddy. Um, and this gives a unique voice.
It
You
does
can
because you're just at that higher register, so you can sort of
write
cut through the
different
mud.
voicing. You're not where your fingers are going. If everyone's playing in C, but you're shaping a G, this is just a whole other voice and a different timbre. And as someone you mentioned I'm a drummer, and so I like when it comes to rhythms, it's really where I like to sort of chomp
Yeah.
and syncopate a bit there, when I play. So it's another voice to the jam, and I haven't had anyone tell me to, hey, knock that off. So
That's awesome.
it's going over well.
Um, there's something about the body of this instrument that reminds me of like floating in the water. Like it seems like it could be a cool kayak material. Would it work as a raw material to make kayaks out of?
I think so. The material itself, there's tricks people do for like boat building is similar with composites, but they'll use a fiberglass or synthetic materials. And it's a light, somewhat buoyant material, as is wood. But if you were to sort of layer it with foam in between, or there's ways to, as you're laying it up, put pieces of foam that will trap more air within there, and that's how they build composite boats. There's
For
usually
buoyancy, yeah.
yeah. So, and there's versions of this where I had really hard closed cell foams, like in the neck and in the head, and they would sit there and bob up and down if the body filled with water. It didn't quite have the rigidity or resonance I was after, but it was like a nice way to like have a lightweight fill material. There's a tricky balance I'm trying to strike with the weight of the instrument, because the heavier, more ones with more mass have a better bass sounds, but as a travel instrument, you want it to be light. So I'm sort of splitting the difference there.
Okay. Do you have plans to expand your product line? And I guess really this is a selfish question, but would you consider making a hemp baritone ukulele?
Yes. I have designs for many instruments. And that's why I didn't, when I rebranded, I call it Hemptone. I don't call it Hemptone guitars, because I have a lot of calls for ukuleles, and uke basses, and bigger guitars, maybe a full size down the road. I'm a drummer first, and I have all kinds of percussion ideas. And other things I'm starting to mess around with, like your guitar wall hanger, that could have a hemp
component to it,
base to it.
Yeah.
Or a little pickles or display, like other little tchotchkes that I could also make of hemp, and sort of for musicians.
Right. I mean, I could see hemp guitar picks, right?
Mm-hmm.
We could pretty much make anything from
plastic, anything cotton, anything wood, right?
Yeah.
Any composites, this can all be hemp, and it could be grown on a larger scale and clean our air while it's happening.
Such a simple idea. Yep.
Yeah, it's a win-win, thrice win if you count the farmer.
Yeah, and it's the only way we're going to get out of the 21st century alive, I think, is by switching all of our, manufacturing to bio-based materials.
Couldn't agree more. And that's part of what makes the work satisfying for me. That's where you become content in your work. There is no end of the rainbow where you just sit around and be happy. Like, you have to, the process is the happy. And having that also contribute in a minor way, I acknowledge, to the greater good internally, is a great place to be for me.
Jay Burstein, it is so great to talk to you. Thank you for everything that you do. And listeners, go to Jay's website, sign up for the newsletter, and check him out on the Instagram at Hemptone Music. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Eric. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I really got a kick of seeing you out there and following your journey with the guitar. It's exactly what it was meant to do.
All right, there you go. That's the show today. Thank you for listening. I will be back next week with updates for you from Penn State's Ag Progress Days. My name is Eric Harlock. I am the digital editor at Lancaster Farming Newspaper, the greatest agricultural newspaper in the world. Check us out online at lancasterfarming.com. And be sure to get a subscription to our print edition. You will be blown away by what we produce every week. Yeah, it's good. It's a good newspaper. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns, just anything you want to share with me, you can always get in touch with me by email. Send it to podcast@lancasterfarming.com, or you can leave me a message at 717-721-4462. All right, so anyway, that does it for me. Until next time, I'll see you in the funny papers.
industrial hemp.
Season 3, Episode 29 of the Lancaster Farming Industrial Hemp Podcast is copyright 2023 by Lancaster Farming Newspaper, part of the Steinman Communications family. Today's show is written, recorded, edited, and produced by Eric Herlock, and the music you hear throughout the show is courtesy of Tin Bird Shadow.